John Wayne as Genghis Khan, the Conqueror, 1956. Few casting decisions from Hollywood's golden age sparked more debate than John Wayne playing Genghis Khan in The Conqueror, released in 1956. Known for embodying the all-American cowboy, Wayne's transformation into the 12th century Mongol warlord was met with widespread disbelief. Reviewers were unrestrained. His performance was slammed as wooden, culturally tone-deaf, and completely miscast. Multiple cinema scholars still rank it among the worst casting decisions in cinematic history. But the backlash didn't end with the acting. The movie's production stirred controversy on multiple fronts. Produced by Howard Hughes, The Conqueror was filmed in Utah's Snow Canyon, located downwind from the Nevada test site, where the U.S. government had conducted over 100 nuclear tests by the early 1950s. According to a report published by People magazine in 1980, an estimated 91 of the 220 cast and crew developed cancer, and 46 died, including Wayne, co-star Susan Hayward and Pedro Armendariz, and director Dick Powell. While no direct link has ever been proven, the numbers ignited decades of speculation about its radioactive legacy. Legends tease that Hughes, reportedly mortified by the movie's reception, bought up as many copies as he could to suppress its circulation. For years, the movie disappeared, only to resurface on television in the 1970s, drawing renewed ridicule and disbelief from a new generation of viewers. Wayne, rarely one to admit mistakes, later acknowledged in interviews that taking the role had been a misstep. That rare admission added another layer to the movie's legacy. Not just a critical and box office failure, but a cautionary tale of the industry's oversights, where star power trumped cultural accuracy and consequences stretched far beyond the screen. Vincent Price as Mr. Scratch, The Story of Mankind. Vincent Price playing the devil, rebranded here as Mr. Scratch, was cast opposite Ronald Colman as the spirit of man in a celestial courtroom where the fate of humanity was debated. On paper, it sounded grand. In execution, it unraveled fast. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times dismissed it as a tedious pageant, criticizing its disjointed structure and lack of emotional weight. Variety called it a muddled lecture with a Hollywood gloss. Its structure, a series of historical vignettes, felt more like a patchwork of cameos than a coherent narrative. Groucho Marx played Peter Minuit, Chico popped up briefly as a monk, while Harpo, in a silent gag, portrayed Napoleon Bonaparte. Oddly, the Marx brothers never appeared on screen together. It's rumored their scenes were filmed separately due to rising tensions and conflicting schedules, a story that has persisted among fans of classic comedy. Director Irwin Allen, later famous for disaster epics like The Towering Inferno, struggled to bring cohesion to the ambitious script. According to a retrospective interview published in the early 1970s, one former crew member described the production as a history class trapped inside a vaudeville act. Despite its purported educational intentions, critics blasted its tonal inconsistency, veering from slapstick to solemnity without warning. Even the film's younger cast members, including a then-unknown Dennis Hopper, couldn't escape the criticism. Reviewers noted that many performances felt robotic, as if the actors themselves were unsure what kind of film they were in. More than 6 decades later, The Story of Mankind remains a cautionary tale, a reminder that a glittering cast can't rescue a film with no clear direction, no tonal balance, and no emotional core. Its Rotten Tomatoes audience score still languishes near the bottom, and its legacy endures, not as a triumph of ensemble filmmaking, but as one of the Golden Age's most baffling misfires. Peter Graves as Dr. Ed Wainwright, Beginning of the End, 1957. In an era dominated by Cold War paranoia and atomic age monsters, Beginning of the End aimed to cash in, but instead it detonated its own credibility. Released in 1957, this sci-fi misfire cast Peter Graves as a government scientist battling giant mutant grasshoppers. The concept wasn't the problem, it was the execution. Instead of using miniatures or visual effects, producers opted for a baffling technique, filming real grasshoppers crawling across black and white photos of Chicago. The illusion failed spectacularly. Critics pounced and audiences laughed when they were supposed to scream. Film historian Bill Warren later called the creature effects some of the most inept ever attempted in a genre already known for corner cutting. Intended as a warning about nuclear experimentation, the film veered into unintentional comedy. Graves, who would later become a household name in Mission Impossible, reportedly referred to the project as just embarrassing, hinting that even his best efforts couldn't salvage the material. Legends tease that the production spiraled due to the chaos of using live insects, grasshoppers that reportedly cannibalized each other between takes, forcing constant replacements. Whether true or not, the rumor only adds to the film's bizarre legacy. While it eventually earned cult status for its camp appeal, Graves' performance remains a symbol of how even a capable lead can't rescue a film built on shaky ground and paper-thin effects. Joan Crawford as Lucy Harbin, Straightjacket, 1964. By the mid-1960s, Joan Crawford had already reinvented herself multiple times, but her turn as axe-wielding Lucy Harbin in William Castle's low-budget thriller Straightjacket left critics and longtime fans baffled. Once celebrated for her Oscar-winning performance in Mildred Pierce, Crawford now found herself in a film promoted with cardboard hatchets and schlocky theater gimmicks. Castle, infamous for his carnival-style marketing, leaned into spectacle over substance, and Crawford's performance, delivered with the same gravitas she brought to her prestige roles, felt out of place alongside the film's pulpy tone. Contemporary critics didn't hold back. The New York Times described her acting as overwrought and melodramatic, while Variety found the film exploitative and unintentionally funny. The discord between Crawford's intensity and the film's camp sensibility was jarring, and many saw it as a sign she had veered far from her Hollywood prime. According to biographer Donald Spoto, Crawford approached the role with complete seriousness, possibly too much for what the script required. Rumors circulated that she demanded script changes and pushed to perform her own act scenes, eager to maintain control over her image even as the roles grew stranger. Some speculate she saw Straightjacket as a chance to stay relevant, even if it meant embracing the horror tropes. While the film later gained cult status for its kitsch appeal, at the time of its release, Crawford's performance was widely viewed as a misstep, proof in the eyes of many that one of Hollywood's grandest stars had traded prestige for pure promotion. Victor Mature as Samson, Samson and Delilah, 1949. Cecil B. DeMille's Samson and Delilah dazzled with lavish sets, technicolor splendor, and biblical spectacle, but for many the weakest link stood front and center. Victor Mature, cast as the mighty Samson, drew criticism for a performance that critics and audiences found stiff, underwhelming, and oddly disconnected from the film's grand ambitions. While the movie soared at the box office, becoming the highest-grossing film of 1950, Mature's portrayal became a frequent target of ridicule in retrospectives. Contemporary reviews were mixed on the acting, with the New York Times' Bosley Crowther describing the performances as synthetic as the scenery. Though not exclusively aimed at Mature, the jab stuck, especially given the contrast between his brooding stoicism and Hedy Lamarr's sultry, scene-stealing turn as Delilah. Her performance, controversial at the time for its sensuality, was magnetic enough to draw attention away from her co-star's lifeless delivery. Stories suggest that Mature's reluctance to engage with the film's more physically demanding scenes extended beyond the usual Hollywood stunt double fare. One persistent rumor claims he refused to wrestle a lion on set due to fear, forcing a stand-in to take his place while Mature kept a safe distance. Whether fact or fiction, the tale added fuel to the perception that the actor was all physique and no fire. Even Mature seemed to lean into the criticism with his trademark self-deprecating humor. He once remarked, "I'm no actor, and I've got 64 films to prove it." That line, repeated in Hollywood circles, became shorthand for a career built more on presence than performance. While Samson and Delilah remains a landmark in biblical epics, Mature's role is often cited as a classic case of Golden Age miscasting, where charisma and box office draw couldn't quite cover for a lack of dramatic range. Decades later, film historians still point to it as a cautionary example of style over substance in the studio-era casting. Marlon Brando as Napoleon Bonaparte, Desiree, 1954. When Marlon Brando stepped into the role of Napoleon Bonaparte for the 1954 historical drama Desiree, expectations were sky-high. Fresh off filming on the waterfront, released earlier that same year, Brando had just delivered one of the most electrifying performances of his career, but his portrayal of the French emperor landed with a thud. Reviewers were blunt. The New York Times, in its November 1954 review, described Brando as appearing ill at ease, while Variety noted his performance lacked the gravitas expected of such a towering historical figure. The contrast was jarring. Audiences who had just seen Brando channel raw, working-class rage and on the waterfront were met with a strangely subdued Napoleon, one who seemed more confused than commanding. Various film experts proposed that Brando's signature method acting clashed with the rigid, theatrical tone of historical epics. Some believe the role simply bored him. Whispers spread around the production. Allegations of creative friction between Brando and director Henry Koster have lingered for decades, with some claiming that Brando resisted direction throughout filming, a pattern not unfamiliar to those tracking his career. Biographer Stefan Canfor noted Brando's tendency to push back against directors he didn't respect, and Desiree may have been no exception. Despite its polished visuals and respectable box office returns, Desiree quickly fell into the shadow of Brando's other 1954 triumph. While On the Waterfront earned him an Academy Award in March of the following year, Desiree faded from public memory. Today, it's rarely listed among his essential works, frequently deemed an uncommon flop from one of Hollywood's most celebrated icons. For a man who redefined screen presence, Brando's Napoleon lacked one crucial element: presence. Katharine Hepburn as Clara Schumann, Song of Love, 1947. When MGM released Song of Love in 1947, it had all the ingredients of a prestige biopic. A revered composer, a period setting, and Katharine Hepburn in the lead. But instead of critical acclaim, the movie received lukewarm reviews and audience indifference. Hepburn, known for her sharp wit and commanding screen presence, seemed out of sync playing Clara Schumann, a reserved, emotionally nuanced figure centered in the world of classical music. Critics pulled no punches. The New York Times review described the film as dull and plodding, and while it didn't single out Hepburn with the phrase curiously detached, it did suggest she brought little warmth to the role. Film historian David Thompson later remarked that Hepburn was miscast, calling her performance too modern and cerebral for the 19th century pianist, a sentiment echoed by others who noted her discomfort in the part. Behind the scenes, there were signs of strain. Some reports claim Hepburn took piano lessons to prepare, but her musical limitations were evident. A hand double was used for the piano scenes, and the disconnect didn't go unnoticed. Its script only made matters worse, flattening Clara's life into a formulaic tale of suffering wife and tortured genius husband. Her own career as a concert pianist and composer was largely sidelined. Gossip persists that Hepburn accepted the role to break type, an attempt to shed her image as the quick-tongued modern woman. But if that was the goal, it backfired. The film underperformed at the box office, and Hepburn never returned to musical biopics. Some surmise the experience left her wary of roles that demanded emotional vulnerability over verbal dexterity. Today, Song of Love is rarely discussed outside of retrospectives on Hepburn's career missteps. While not a total disaster, it stands as a rare instance where one of Hollywood's strongest personalities was cast against type, and the gamble didn't pay off. Charlton Heston as Michelangelo, The Agony and the Ecstasy, 1965. By the mid-1960s, Charlton Heston was Hollywood's go-to figure for towering mythic roles: Moses, Judah Ben-Hur, El Cid. So when he stepped into the sandals of Michelangelo in The Agony and the Ecstasy, expectations were sky-high. The film, adapted from Irving Stone's biographical novel, positioned itself as a cerebral clash between genius and power, with Heston's Michelangelo locked in a war of wills against Rex Harrison's Pope Julius II. Visually, it delivered. Leon Shamroy's cinematography earned an Oscar nod, and the Sistine Chapel sequences remained technically impressive. But Heston's performance became a sticking point. The New York Times, in its October 8, 1965 review, labeled it grim and unyielding, noting that he delivered lines as though carved in stone. Variety echoed the tone, suggesting his portrayal lacked the emotional depth expected of a tortured Renaissance artist. The common thread? Heston's trademark stoicism, so effective in biblical epics, felt stiff and out of place in a role that demanded inner conflict and vulnerability. The tension between Heston and Harrison was intended to fuel the film's drama, but their scenes often came off more theatrical than tense. Some later critics quipped it felt like a marble bust arguing with a bronze statue. While that line didn't appear in reviews from the time, it captures the chilly dynamic many found distracting. Speculations swirled that Heston's rigid approach stemmed from his intense preparation. He reportedly studied Michelangelo's writings and art obsessively, but some insiders claimed he resisted direction that called for emotional softness. Legends tease that director Carol Reed struggled to draw a more layered performance from Heston, who remained committed to portraying Michelangelo as a man of iron will rather than tortured inspiration. The agony and the ecstasy wasn't a box office failure, but Heston's performance has remained divisive. For some, it's a study in miscasting, a powerful actor misaligned with a character who needed more fragility. For others, it marked the limits of Heston's range, exposing how his commanding presence could overshadow emotional depth when the role required subtlety. Bette Davis as Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, 1955. By the mid-1950s, Bette Davis was already a two-time Academy Award winner with a reputation for commanding the screen. But her return to the role of Queen Elizabeth I in The Virgin Queen didn't earn the royal reception she may have expected. Critics and audiences found her performance curiously out of step with the times, stylized, theatrical, and buried under layers of makeup that some said distracted more than dazzled. Davis had first played Elizabeth in The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex back in 1939, a performance widely admired for its emotional complexity. 16 years later, her reprisal was met with turned heads. Her portrayal leaned heavily into stage-like affectations, arched brows, clipped diction, and sweeping gestures that clashed with the decade's growing preference for realism. A Variety review reportedly described her performance as more stage than screen, a jab that echoed across other critiques. The visual presentation didn't help. Davis's elaborate costume, towering red wig, and heavy prosthetics sparked comparisons to a wax figure. Some reviewers argued the makeup swallowed her expressions, muting the emotional nuance she was known for. The New York Times noted that the film felt lacking in urgency and emotional depth, with Davis's Elizabeth struggling to break through the artifice. Though the film received a BAFTA nomination for Davis, it failed to resonate with audiences. Talk abounded that the studio had relied on Davis's legacy to propel the film, but changing tastes were working against her. The rise of younger, more naturalistic stars like Grace Kelly and Audrey Hepburn left little room for the stylized intensity that had once defined Davis's appeal. Some speculate that Davis took the role as a bid to reassert her dominance in a shifting industry, but instead of a triumphant return, the Virgin Queen seemed to underscore Hollywood's changing guard. While Davis continued to land leading roles through the late 1950s, such as in Storm Center and The Catered Affair, this performance marked one of her most divisive. It wasn't a fall from grace, but it was a reminder that even legends could misread the moment. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.